Aurelius. 53rd floor, Midtown Manhattan. Private dining room, 12 people. A $700 million deal, one signature away from done. Victor Chen sat at the head of the table. 39 years old, Harvard MBA, heir to the Chen Group, infrastructure holdings across 17 countries. He wore a navy suit cut specifically for his frame and carried the ease of a man who had never once been told no. Across from him sat Dr. Kendra Malone, CEO of Econova Energy. Deep burgundy blazer, posture exact, hands flat on the table. By any serious measure, the most qualified person in that room. The dinner had moved pleasantly on the surface. Policy, market conditions, Shanghai terminals, the conversation that happens when large money is about to change hands and everyone is performing cordiality. Then the sommelier poured a second round, and Victor turned to his vice president of legal affairs, a quiet man named Wei Jun, and switched to Mandarin. Smooth. Casual. The register of someone certain no one else at the table speaks the language. He said, "She looks exactly like the woman who used to clean for our family in Hong Kong. Same face." Wei Jun reached for his water glass and said nothing. Victor smiled at his own thought. He reached into his breast pocket, produced a $50 bill, and set it on the tablecloth beside the breadbasket. Then he nudged the leather menu across the white cloth toward Kendra. 2 fingers, a short push. The gesture of a man returning something to the person whose job it is to hold it. To anyone watching casually, it looked like a man tipping a server. 2 chairs down, Tara Brooks was not watching casually. Tara was 28, Kendra's executive assistant, and she had spent 6 years learning to be invisible in rooms like this one. People looked past her the way they looked past the centerpiece. She had learned, carefully, to use that. Her hand moved under the table. Her phone screen stayed dark. Victor reached for his glass. His elbow caught the bottle's edge, small, careless, and a single drop of red wine escaped the lip. It landed on the white tablecloth and rolled, slowly, toward the folded bill. The drop soaked into one corner of the 50. Conversation stopped. Not all at once. One person noticed, then the next, until the table had simply gone quiet. Kendra Malone reached out. No urgency, no change in expression. She picked up the damp bill with 2 fingers, pressed it against the wine stain on the tablecloth, blotting it the way you use a cloth napkin, then placed the bill back in front of Victor Chen. Face up, flat, damp corner toward him. She did not look at him. She turned a page of the documents in front of her, then another. Then she looked up, not at Victor, at the room, and let 4 full seconds of silence exist without filling them. In a room like this, 4 seconds is a very long time. Then, in English, clearly, with the tone of someone setting down an agenda item that can wait. "We'll speak more later." She went back to her documents. 12 people sat with that moment. Some looked at the damp bill. Some looked at Victor's face, which had traveled through something complicated in those 4 seconds and was now being carefully rearranged. A few looked at Kendra Malone and couldn't quite name what they had just witnessed. Under the table, Tara pressed stop on her recording app and folded both hands in her lap. To understand what that moment actually was, what Kendra had already seen in the contract before she sat down, what she had already planned while Victor was still composing his insults, you have to go back 2 weeks. You have to go back further than that. You have to go back to Atlanta. Atlanta in early October has a specific quality that people who grew up there recognize before they can name it. The heat finally breaks after a summer that never quite admits it is ending. The air comes in off the Piedmont with something close to an apology. On the smaller roads behind Peachtree Street, the ones that don't appear in travel guides, the trees begin to change without announcement. Kendra Malone grew up in Vine City, 4 miles from downtown, in a house her mother rented for $800 a month. 3 rooms, a radiator that made a sound at 2 in the morning that took Kendra years to learn to sleep through. The sound was a kind of clanking, metal expanding. And when she was small, she used to lie awake listening to it, counting the intervals, until counting became a habit she never lost. Her mother, Patricia, worked the overnight shift cleaning offices in the CNN Center complex. She left at 10:30. She came home at 6:15. Breakfast was on the table by 6:45 because Kendra had school at 7:30, and the bus wasn't always reliable, and walking was the backup, and you planned for the backup. Patricia Malone planned for every backup. She had learned that the world did not adjust itself to accommodate the unprepared, and she taught this to her daughter, not through speeches, but through the daily fact of her own life. Kendra was 7 years old when she first understood that her mother's work was invisible to the people who depended on it. She understood this not from a lesson, but from one specific afternoon, a non-school day. She had ridden along with Patricia and sat in the corner of an empty conference room while her mother worked. A man came through. He was in a suit. He was moving quickly, the way busy men move, and he crossed the room without once glancing at the floor. The floor Patricia had been on her knees cleaning 12 minutes before he arrived. He passed 3 feet from where Patricia was standing, and he did not acknowledge her. He kept moving. Kendra watched him go. She did not say anything. She was 7. But she filed it, the way she would spend the rest of her life filing things, quietly, without letting on. And she carried it forward. She graduated from Maynard Jackson High School with a 4.0 and 2 letters of recommendation that her chemistry teacher and her English teacher wrote without being asked, because they recognized something in her before she had fully named it herself. She applied to MIT on a full scholarship and was accepted. She took 2 degrees, chemical engineering and applied mathematics, and a doctorate in energy systems policy, all in 7 years, because she was paying attention to time in a way that people who have never worried about money rarely have to. 7 years is fast for 3 degrees. She did it on 4 hours of sleep some nights, on dining hall food, on the specific fuel of knowing exactly what she was working toward and exactly what it would cost her if she stopped. She came back to Atlanta. Consulting firm, 4 years. Utilities company, 3 years. Federal Energy Research Division, 2 years. She saved carefully. She borrowed a conference room from a former professor at Georgia Tech and started EcoNova Energy with 11 people, a provisional patent on a battery integration system her team had been developing, and a business model that 3 separate venture capital firms told her was either 10 years too early or 10 years too late. She raised Maya through all of it, alone, her daughter doing homework at the conference room table during investor calls, Kendra rescheduling board presentations around school events, managing the specific arithmetic of being a founder and a parent at the same time, with no margin for error in either column. 9 years later, EcoNova had 1,700 employees and active contracts on 4 continents. Its valuation had crossed $2 billion. The Chen Group deal came through a private equity intermediary with deep relationships in Southeast Asia. $700 million. A joint infrastructure venture, solar and wind deployment across markets in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. For EcoNova, the largest international partnership in its history. Kendra flew to New York the previous Thursday. The preliminary meetings were cordial. Victor Chen was polished, prepared with data, with charm, with a hospitality smooth enough to pass for genuine until you looked at it carefully. He shook her hand. He used her first name. He asked once where she had studied. MIT, she said. He nodded and moved on quickly. She noticed the speed of that transition. She let it pass. Back in her hotel suite, she went through the contract line by line. 340 pages, attachments, annexes, 4 technical addendums covering intellectual property provisions. Her legal team had prepared a summary. She read the full document anyway, the way she had always read everything, beginning to end, no skipping, because the thing that matters is almost never in the section where you expect to find it. At page 212, in a section titled Technology Licensing and Derivational Use, she found a clause. It was built to be skimmed. Passive voice, long parenthetical phrases, reference numbers pointing back to other sections in a chain that required patience to follow. But followed to its actual meaning, the clause created a mechanism by which any technology developed during the joint venture could be sublicensed by the Chen Group to third parties, under terms that Econova would have no final authority to reject. A door that had been built to look like a wall? Kendra took a yellow highlighter and marked the clause. Then she picked up her pen and drew a single, thin line through the highlighting, as if she had changed her mind, as if she had decided it was not worth marking. She closed the contract. She sat with her coffee for a long moment. The city outside the window was doing what New York does at 11 at night. Not quieting, exactly, but shifting registers, the daytime noise replaced by something lower and steadier. Then she called Tara. "Are you recording ready for tomorrow?" Tara said yes. "Keep everything running. Don't stop anything early." A pause. "Wear the gray blazer tomorrow. You look less memorable in it." Tara had worked with Kendra for 6 years. She put on the gray blazer without asking why. Inside Econova, Marcus Hale had been sending urgent messages all week. The deal was too important to risk over fine print, he argued. The board was supportive, but impatient. Momentum mattered. Marcus was 52, meticulous, 4 years with the company. He was also, Kendra had begun to suspect, carrying on conversations she had not been included in. She had no hard proof yet, but she had noticed, twice in internal prep meetings, the speed with which he moved past the IP clause. She had noticed how eager he seemed to close this particular deal. She had noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when the Chen Group's name came up, a look that was almost careful, almost managed, like a man choosing his expressions. She noticed. She filed it. She waited. The gala dinner was Thursday. The formal signing was Monday. 4 days in which she was certain everything would show itself. It always did. People who believe they are unseen always eventually show you exactly who they are. She had learned this at 7 years old, in a conference room at the CNN Center, watching a man walk across a clean floor without looking down. The conference room on the 41st floor of the Meridian Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides and a long table that seated 20. The Chen Group's New York office had booked it for the week. 14 people filed in Tuesday morning. Victor's legal team, his vice president of strategy, 2 senior deal architects, regional heads for the proposed deployment territories. On Econova's side, Kendra, Marcus, her head of legal, her international development director, and 2 representatives from the investment consortium that had brokered the introduction. Reinhardt, a German fund manager with a reputation for caution, and David Lim, a Singaporean investor who had been in Southeast Asian energy markets for 20 years. The meeting was scheduled for 3 hours. It ran for 5.5. Victor opened with a presentation. Clean slides, strong visuals, the production quality that signals serious resourcing. He covered market opportunity, deployment timelines, regulatory environments across 6 jurisdictions, projected return models under 3 different scenarios. Thorough, fluent, and, Kendra observed from the first slide, carefully shaped. Some numbers were accurate. Some were contextualized in ways that made Econova's financial position look more precarious than it was. A revenue-to-debt ratio appeared without the offsetting asset values that would have corrected it. A single weak quarter from 18 months ago was foregrounded without the 3 recovery quarters that followed it. Nothing technically false, everything deliberately angled. She watched Reinhardt's expression shift slightly, the small tightening around the eyes of a man beginning to revise his assumptions. Victor moved through his slides without pausing for questions. He answered what came at him with just enough technical specificity to satisfy without fully informing. He was good at it. The kind of good that comes from doing something many times in rooms where no one pushed back hard enough. Then Marcus Hale opened a folder. He placed a document on the table and described it as an internal financial assessment. A health check Econova's board had commissioned 6 months prior, he said. Useful context for understanding the partnership structure being proposed. The document was not that. It was that document, but the March draft, from a period when 3 of Econova's international subsidiaries were mid-restructuring and their numbers were temporarily compressed. The final version, completed in June, told a completely different story. The restructuring had resolved. The numbers had recovered substantially. The June document showed a company in a strong position. Marcus had handed them the March draft. Kendra kept her face still. She set her pen down slowly, so her hand would have something to do. Around the table, Reinhardt began asking questions about Econova's governance structures. Pointed questions. The questions a man asks when he has begun to wonder what he hasn't been told. David Lim leaned toward his colleague and said something just below carrying distance across the table. His colleague nodded once. Then Harrison Ng, one of Victor's deal architects, a man in his 40s who had been quiet through most of the morning, said, with the careful phrasing of someone who believes he is being diplomatic, "Perhaps there are structural adjustments to the leadership arrangement that might make the investor community more comfortable during the transition period." He did not say, "replace the CEO." He arranged his words so he did not have to. Kendra looked at him. She said nothing. David Lim said, quietly, but not quietly enough, "Maybe she focuses on the technical side, the operational layer." The operational layer. As if she were a systems supervisor, as if she had not built this company from a borrowed room with 11 people and a provisional patent. Against the wall, Tara's thumb moved on her phone screen without looking down. She had been recording for 4 hours. She did not stop. Victor Chen watched from his end of the table. He did not correct Ng. He did not push back on Lim's suggestion. He raised his water glass to his lips and watched. The way a man watches something he has arranged and is now monitoring. That silence was the most telling thing in the room. Kendra let it accumulate. Then she closed the folder in front of her. "I'd like a 10-minute recess," she said. Victor smiled. Of course. In the hallway, she stood at the window for 3 minutes and looked at the city. She did not call anyone. She breathed, 4 counts in, 4 out, the way she had learned to do in situations where her face needed to stay ahead of her feelings. Tara came out 2 minutes later and stood beside her. "The draft document," Kendra said. "March version," Tara said quietly. "Not June." Kendra nodded. "Do you want me to?" "Not yet." She straightened her blazer. "Let it run a little further." They went back inside. The memo arrived through official channels the following morning. It was titled, "Partnership Optimization Memorandum," a phrase that existed nowhere in standard corporate practice, invented to make what it contained sound procedural. Distributed simultaneously to Econova's full board, it suggested that, in light of the information presented during negotiations, a review of the executive leadership structure might be prudent ahead of the formal signing. Signed by Victor Chen, co-signed by Marcus Hale. Kendra read it at the small desk in her hotel room. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago. She had not noticed. The board call that followed was conducted by video conference, 5 of 7 members joining. Everyone spoke carefully, the measured, considerate tones of people who are uncomfortable and uncertain in equal parts. 2 board members who had been with Econova from the early years, who had believed in the company before it was easy to, used the word optics, as in, how would this appear to the investor community? As in, at this scale, with this capital involved, perhaps a transitional structure. Kendra listened. She let them finish. "I'll have a response by end of day," she said. She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the silence of the room. 43 floors below, the city moved in its ordinary Wednesday afternoon rhythms. Cabs, pedestrians, delivery trucks making their rounds. The sound came up through the glass as a low, continuous pressure. A city that had no idea and no interest in the contents of a partnership optimization memorandum. Her phone lit up. A text from Maya. Maya was 19, first year at Howard, loosely following the deal the way college students follow things, in fragments, between classes. But someone inside the consortium had talked to someone who had mentioned it somewhere, and that morning, a financial commentary newsletter had described EcoNova's leadership as facing scrutiny ahead of a major deal. Maya had seen it. She wrote, "Mom, are you okay? I'm seeing stuff online." Kendra stood up, took her keycard, and walked down the hall to the restroom at the end of the corridor. She let the door close behind her. She ran cold water over her wrists. She looked at her own face in the mirror. Her eyes were steady. That was the thing that always surprised her. After everything, her eyes stayed steady. She didn't know whether that was strength or just the way her face was built. Probably both. Probably neither. She stood there for 4 minutes and let herself be genuinely uncertain. Not performing uncertainty, not managing it, actually holding it, the full weight of what was in front of her. The board's hesitation, Marcus's betrayal, which she could now name that way without qualification. The 1,700 people at EcoNova whose jobs depended on the company's stability. The specific, grinding exhaustion of having to be excellent simply to be taken seriously, year after year, in room after room, and still arriving at a moment like this one. She thought about signing. She let the thought be real. Sign the agreement. Absorb the clause. Fight the IP language in arbitration later. Protect the jobs now. Come back another day. She let that option have its full weight. Then she took the contract out of her bag. She had been carrying the physical copy all week, all 340 pages. And she opened it to page 212. She looked at the yellow highlight, at the thin line she had drawn through it. She thought about what the clause meant in practice. For the engineers who had spent 7 years building EcoNova's battery integration systems. For what the company would look like in a decade if she handed that technology over now, wrapped in language designed to make the handover look like something else. She thought about her mother coming home at 6:15, setting breakfast on the table, planning for every backup. She thought about the man who had walked across the clean floor without looking down. She closed the contract. She dried her hands. She looked at herself once more. Not for reassurance, but the way you look at a decision you've made and are not going to revisit. She walked back to her room and called Tara. "It's time to put the file together." "Already started," Tara said. There was something in her voice. Not excitement exactly, but steadiness. The sound of someone who has been ready for this. "How much do we have?" "Enough." "Good. Get a room for tomorrow morning, early, before anyone else is in the building." She hung up. She texted Maya. "I'm good. Trust the process. Love you." The easier path had been real. She had looked directly at it. She had set it down. Thursday morning came in gray and cold off the Hudson, the kind of weather that makes the city feel serious about itself. The final pre-signing meeting had been called for 8:30 in the Meridian Tower's main conference room. The formal signing was still on for Monday, but Victor's team had requested the meeting to, in their words, finalize the revised framework ahead of documentation. The revised framework meant the leadership restructuring. Kendra had read the language 3 times to confirm that it meant exactly what she thought it meant. It did. She arrived at 8. She placed her materials at the head of the table, the position Victor's team had set for him. She sat down there and opened her folder. When Victor arrived and found her in that seat, he took the one to her right without comment. A small adjustment, made before the meeting started, that cost him something he didn't intend to give. 8 people settled in. Victor's 3 lead negotiators, Marcus Hale, who took his chair at the far end without meeting anyone's eyes, 2 members of EcoNova's legal team, and Tara along the wall, tablet open, leather portfolio flat on her knee. Victor opened in his measured professional register, the version he ran when he needed something and wanted it to look like generosity. He outlined the co-leadership model, the title adjustment for the interim period, the shared decision-making structure. He used words like collaborative and transitional and reinforced confidence. He framed the restructuring as addition, not subtraction. He was good at this. He had done it before, in other rooms, to other people. When he finished, he looked at Kendra. "I want to make sure we have full clarity, Dr. Malone. Are there any elements you'd like clarified?" "Yes," she said. "One thing." "Of course." "At dinner Thursday evening," she said, "you made a comment to Wei Jun about me. I want to make sure I understood it correctly." Victor's expression stayed composed. "I'm not certain what you're referring to." "You mentioned a woman who worked for your family in Hong Kong," she said. "I want to verify that I understood the context." He looked at her for a moment, assessing, recalibrating, and then relaxed by a degree. He glanced at his legal lead, then back to Kendra. Then he said, in Mandarin, in exactly the same easy register he had used at the dinner table, "It was nothing. A private observation. Nothing meant for this room." Kendra let a beat pass. Then she replied in Mandarin, clean, precise, unhurried. The Mandarin she had been building for 6 years, 1 year studying in Beijing, then a language partner twice a week, every week since, because she had known from the first contact with the Chen Group's intermediary that language access would matter. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, without announcing it. She said, "You called me Hei Ren Pu Ren. The accurate translation, in the context you used it, is black servant. Is that correct?" The room went very still. Victor's legal lead stopped moving entirely. Victor said nothing. "I'd like you to confirm it," she said, still in Mandarin, still steady. "For the record." A long pause. Victor said, "That is one translation." Kendra nodded once. She switched to English, clearly for every person in that room. "At that same dinner," she said, "you told Wei Jun I probably didn't know which fork to use. You told him I looked exactly like the woman who used to clean your family's house." She looked around the table, one face at a time. "I want the record to be clear. I did not misunderstand you. I understood you completely. I understood every word spoken in Mandarin across every meeting this week." Marcus Hale was looking at the surface of the table. Victor pivoted quickly into English, his tone shifting to management mode. "I think there may be cultural context that—" "There isn't a translation problem," Kendra said. "Your Mandarin is excellent. Mine is sufficient." She opened the folder in front of her and placed a copy of page 212 on the table. "I also want to address this provision," she said. "Section 12, paragraph 4. The technology sublicensing clause." She set 3 additional documents beside it. "These are contracts from 2 of the Chen Group's prior joint ventures in Southeast Asia. Both contain the identical clause. In both cases, the originating company's core intellectual property was sublicensed to third parties without their effective consent within 24 months. Both contracts are in the public regulatory filings." Victor's legal lead said carefully, "Those involved different structural arrangements." "I know what structures they involved," Kendra said. She placed one more document on the table. "The financial assessment Mr. Hale provided to the consortium on Tuesday was the March draft of EcoNova's internal review. The final assessment was completed in June. The figures are materially different. I have both versions here." She did not raise her voice once. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when every person in them has just understood something they cannot un-understand. Victor sat with his hands flat on the table. She could see it happening behind his eyes, The rapid recalculation, the distance measured from where he thought he was to where he actually was. He had walked into this room believing he was managing her. He was only now understanding what had actually been happening for the past 2 weeks. "I'd like to schedule a call," Kendra said. "This afternoon. Full board and the global investor group." Victor started to speak. "It is not a request," she said. Tara assembled the call in 4 hours. She worked from the contacts list she had been quietly building since the first preliminary meeting. Direct lines, not switchboards. She reached the consortium investors herself. She contacted the Chen Group's investor relations office in Shanghai and requested, formally and in writing, that the chairman and senior board members be present for an urgent evidentiary disclosure. The phrase evidentiary disclosure was deliberate. It got the right people in their chairs. At 2 in the afternoon, the Meridian Tower's main conference room had the display screen at the far end showing a split feed. The Chen Group's boardroom in Shanghai, the chairman, seated at center, Victor's father, a man in his late 60s, the kind of face that has watched a company get built over decades and knows what real trouble looks like when it arrives. Beside him, the chief legal counsel, the head of investor relations, 2 board members who had flown in that morning from Beijing and Hong Kong. On separate tiles, Reinhardt, David Lim, and 4 other consortium investors joining from London, Singapore, and Tokyo. Victor sat at the conference table in New York with his legal team. His expression was composed. He had not yet taken the full measure of the room. Marcus Hale sat at the far end of the table with his hands in his lap. He had been very still for an hour. Tara connected her tablet to the room's display system without being asked. She had been ready to do this since Tuesday. "I'm going to share some audio," Kendra said, "and then the supporting documentation." What played first was 47 seconds from the dinner at Aurelius. Victor's voice, unmistakably in Mandarin. The comment about the cleaning woman in Hong Kong. The comment about the fork. Delivered in the easy, private tone of a man in a conversation he believes is contained. The Shanghai boardroom was silent. A second clip followed. 2 minutes of conversation between Victor and Harrison Ng during a break in Tuesday's negotiation session, in which Ng described the leadership restructuring proposal as making sure the right people control the final decision chain. Victor turns to his legal lead and said, low and quick, "Get me off this call." His legal lead put a hand on his arm. "Victor, do not," Kendra continued. She presented the financial documentation discrepancy, March draft against June final, differences highlighted, materiality clear. She presented the sub-licensing clause with its 2 historical precedents from the regulatory filings. Then she placed a third item on the table, a chain of internal emails recovered through Econova's audit trail. Marcus Hale, 3 weeks before negotiations formally began, corresponding with the Chen Group's legal team. In those emails, Marcus had identified which of Econova's intellectual property provisions carried the least internal board scrutiny. He had described which contract structures would be least likely to trigger a full review. He had told them where the gaps were and helped them design the clause to fit through them. He had been working with them before the negotiations started. Marcus Hale set both palms flat on the table. The color had left his face. Victor reached forward and moved his hand toward the button that would disconnect his video feed from the call. "Disconnecting won't change what's been presented," Kendra said, without raising her voice. "The documentation has already been distributed to all participants and filed with Econova's legal counsel." His hand stopped. He did not press the button. On the screen in Shanghai, the chairman turned to his legal counsel and spoke briefly in Mandarin. The counsel nodded. Then the chairman looked directly into the camera, directly at his son, and said in English, so that everyone in both rooms could hear, "Victor, we will speak when you are back in Shanghai." Victor said nothing. The chairman turned to Kendra. "Dr. Malone, what is your decision?" "I'm withdrawing from the agreement," she said. "Effective immediately." On Tara's tablet, the formal notice of withdrawal, signed, time-stamped, copied to all parties, went out. The display screen updated. The status of the joint venture agreement changed to withdrawn by EcoNova Energy, pending legal review. $700 million. Gone. Reinhardt, the cautious German investor who had been asking pointed questions since Tuesday, said quietly into the silence, "Dr. Malone, I owe you an apology." She looked at him steadily. "Use it as a reference point," she said. The formal investigation opened on the Monday morning that had been reserved for the signing ceremony. The Chen Group moved fast, the speed of an organization that had perhaps been quietly managing around Victor's methods for longer than anyone had said out loud. He was recalled to Shanghai within 72 hours. His title as Executive Director of International Development was suspended pending review. Within 6 weeks, the suspension became permanent, announced with a statement that used the phrases strategic realignment and leadership transition, and said nothing specific at all. His name came off the masthead of the group's annual report. The photograph that had hung in the executive corridor on the 36th floor of the Chen Group's Pudong headquarters was taken down. Not in a dramatic moment. Someone simply removed it one morning, and the wall where it had been was repainted the same color as before. Victor was still wealthy. He still had his family name. But he had learned, at 39, what it feels like when the rooms you assumed would always be available to you are no longer available. Marcus Hale was terminated by EcoNova's board on the Wednesday following the disclosure. For cause, which meant no severance and an immediate referral to the company's general counsel for assessment of legal exposure. By the following month, he was the subject of a civil action for breach of fiduciary duty. His attorneys negotiated for 8 months. He settled. The terms were sealed, but people who understand how these things work made reasonable inferences from the size of his legal bills. He did not work in finance again, not at that level. At EcoNova, the weeks after the withdrawal were harder than they looked from the outside. A $700 million deal does not disappear quietly. There were calls to manage, statements to prepare, board concerns to address in the middle of everything else. 3 consortium investors withdrew their interest temporarily. The company's valuation softened during the uncertainty, and there were days when the internal numbers looked like they were telling a story Kendra did not want to have to tell. But there was also something else happening. The story got out. Not through Kendra's team, but because 26 people had been across the 2 negotiation sessions and the final meeting, and people talk. A version of the events appeared in 2 financial publications in the 2nd week. By the 3rd week, the audio recording, filed as part of EcoNova's formal legal disclosure and therefore part of the public record, had been excerpted in a long-form piece about racial bias in international business negotiations. The piece was careful and thorough, and it was read very widely. The response surprised even Kendra. A Nordic infrastructure fund with $12 billion under management reached out. Then a Canadian pension consortium. Then a Japanese green energy group that had been watching EcoNova's battery integration work for 2 years and had been waiting, they said, to see how the company performed under real pressure before committing. These were not sympathy calls. They were professional responses to something clear. A CEO who had identified fraud, documented it methodically over several weeks, and walked away from $750 million rather than sign a contract that would compromise what her company had built. That said something about how EcoNova operated. It was a more useful advertisement than anything they could have written. By the 5th week, EcoNova had entered preliminary discussions with 4 new partners. None individually matched the Chen Group deal. 2 of them combined exceeded it. On a Thursday morning, about 6 weeks after the withdrawal, Kendra walked into EcoNova's main conference room in Atlanta for an all-hands update. She had given these talks many times, quarterly usually, with slides and a prepared agenda. She had no slides this time. When she came through the door, someone stood. Then someone else. Then the room stood, one person pulling the next into it, the way things move through a group when they are genuine rather than arranged. Kendra stood at the front and let it happen. She did not deflect it. She did not make a joke to ease the weight of the moment. She had earned the right to receive it without apology. After a moment, she raised one hand. The room quieted. "We have work to do," she said. And they went to work. There is a building on Vine City's main road that has been there since before Kendra was born. It started as a small commercial complex, insurance agency, dental practice, community credit union in succession. For the last decade, it had been run by a non-profit workforce development center. The lobby still had the original terrazzo floor, laid in 1962, pale gray with flecks of white and amber, solid and unadorned, and built by someone who expected it to outlast them. It had outlasted them. On a Saturday morning in early November, Kendra drove down to Vine City with Maya, who had come home from Howard for the weekend. The trees along the side streets had fully turned, deep orange, rust, the brief amber that Georgia gets before the wind takes it. Gloria, who ran the workforce center and had known Patricia Malone for 30 years, met them at the door. They walked through to the back of the building together. Gloria was telling a story about Patricia from 1998, something involving a broken floor buffer and a very surprised security guard. And Maya laughed the way young people laugh at evidence that their parents once existed outside of being their parents. There was a room at the back, utility room, then records room, then the credit union's break room, now being converted into a study space and computer lab for the center's training programs. The renovation was mid-process. One wall stripped to the original plaster, new electrical conduit running along the baseboard, extension cords and drop cloths, and the smell of fresh paint drying. Pushed to one side to make room for the work was a desk. Metal frame, laminate top, the kind that office buildings owned by the thousand in the 1980s. Scarred surface. One drawer that didn't close all the way. Built without any expectation of being remembered. Kendra had found it from a photograph. A holiday party image from the CNN Center offices in 1994, kept in a shoebox in Patricia's closet in East Point. In the background of the photograph, barely in frame, was this desk. Her mother had cleaned it every night for 6 years. Cleaned it, locked up, walked to the bus. Through some chain of surplus sales and nonprofit donations, the desk had ended up here. Kendra went to the supply cart in the corner. She took a cloth, moistened it at the utility sink, and folded it in thirds, the way her mother had folded cloths, the fold that keeps a clean surface working longer. She wiped down the desk slowly, not quickly, the way you clean something to be done with it. Deliberately, the way you clean something you are taking care of. Maya watched without speaking for a moment. Then she said, "I get it now. Why you didn't sign." Kendra set the cloth on the corner of the desk. She looked at it before she answered. "Your grandmother cleaned every room the same way, whether anyone was watching or not," she said. "That's what integrity looks like when it's not performing." Maya nodded slowly. Outside the half-finished room, someone on the renovation crew turned on a radio. Something old, a song Patricia Malone would have known, and then turned it down when they realized there were people nearby. "You either carry that," Kendra said, "or you don't." That afternoon, at a gathering in the Workforce Center's main hall, Gloria, 40 people from the neighborhood, students from the training programs, some of Patricia's former overnight shift colleagues, a few teachers from Maynard-Jackson who were now old enough to retire and hadn't, Kendra announced the Eco Nova Foundation Scholarship. 30 full scholarships annually, renewable for 4 years. For young black women pursuing STEM degrees, with priority for applicants from working-class households in Atlanta, Birmingham, Memphis, and New Orleans. The scholarship included mentorship through EcoNova's professional network, a guaranteed paid summer internship, and, this was Kendra's specific insistence, the provision she had argued for most firmly with the Foundation's attorneys, a living stipend sufficient that recipients would not need to take on part-time work during the academic year. That last part was personal in a way she did not explain publicly. She had done the math at 17 on how many hours of work it would take to cover the gap between her scholarship and her actual expenses. She had worked those hours. She had graduated in 7 years. But it had cost her in ways that didn't show in the transcript. In sleep, in the specific low-grade anxiety of financial precarity running underneath everything else year after year. She did not want the next generation to pay that cost when she now had the ability to remove it. Later that evening, at Patricia's house in East Point, the house in a quiet neighborhood with a porch and a persimmon tree in the yard, Kendra found an envelope on the kitchen table. Courier delivery. The Chen Group seal on the outside. Inside was a letter on heavy cream paper, handwritten in English. Careful penmanship, deliberate and a little formal, the hand of a man who had learned to write in a different era. The chairman. He wrote that he had been present for the disclosure call. He had heard the recording. He had reviewed the documentation. He was not ashamed, he wrote, of the legal exposure or the professional consequences. Those were earned, and he understood that. He was ashamed of what his son had said at that dinner table. Not because it had been discovered, because it had been said at all, about a person who deserved full respect in the name of a company he had spent his life building. He wrote that he had known men, over a long career, who confused inherited position with earned authority. He had been one of them, in ways that only age had made visible to him. He offered an apology, not for the failed deal, for the dinner. At the end of the letter, he proposed something different. A joint venture. Not the original structure, not the sub-licensing framework, not any version of the revised arrangement. A clean contract drafted from the beginning. Econova's technology remaining Econova's, with no ambiguity and no doors built to look like walls. Terms she would set, all final decisions resting with her. He did not ask for a quick reply. He said he would wait. Kendra set the letter on the table. Patricia came in from the kitchen with 2 cups of tea, set one beside Kendra without asking what the letter was, and settled into her chair by the window. The same chair, or the same style of chair, she had sat in since Kendra could remember. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "Good news?" Patricia asked. "Complicated news," Kendra said. Her mother looked at her across the rim of her cup with the expression of a woman who has sorted complicated things into manageable ones for 50 years and has long since stopped finding the process surprising. "Then you'll figure it out," she said. "Same as always." It was the same thing she had said when Kendra's scholarship had come through. The same thing she had said when Econova's first major contract fell through and had to be rebuilt from scratch. The same thing, always, delivered with the same certainty. Not the performative certainty of someone trying to reassure, but the factual certainty of someone who has watched the evidence accumulate over 46 years and is simply reporting what the data shows. Kendra looked at her mother and felt something she could not quite name. Something between gratitude and recognition. The feeling of understanding a thing fully that you have known your whole life without yet having the right words for it. Maya came in from the other room with a sweater she'd found somewhere in the house that might have been hers from high school or might have been Patricia's. She dropped onto the couch, looked at the letter on the table, looked at her mother's face, and decided not to ask. Kendra folded the letter. She held it for a moment, the weight of the cream paper, the careful handwriting, the 3 daughters he had mentioned, the words he had chosen to close a distance that could not fully be closed, but could, perhaps, be acknowledged honestly. Then she set it down and picked up her tea. She looked at her mother. She looked at her daughter. These 2 people who were the whole architecture of what she had built toward, underneath the company, underneath the negotiations and the contracts and the $700 million decisions, the foundation and the reason for all of it. She felt something settle in her chest that was not triumph and was not relief, but was quieter than both. Something closer to wholeness. The feeling of a thing that has been out of alignment for a long time, finally sitting level. She smiled. Not the composed, directed expression she wore in conference rooms, the one she had spent years calibrating. The other kind, the one that simply arrives, that costs nothing and cannot be manufactured, that Maya had been trying to photograph since she got her first phone, and had never quite captured because it only appeared when Kendra wasn't thinking about it. "It can wait until Monday," she said. Patricia nodded once, satisfied, and turned to look out the window at the yard. The persimmon tree still had a few leaves, orange gold, holding on past their season, the way things sometimes hold on past the point when you expect them to let go. Outside, East Point was quiet in the November dark. The porch light was on, the same warm yellow it had always been, visible from the street the way it had been visible on every night Kendra could remember coming home. It was enough. It had always been enough, and for the first time in a very long time, she did not feel the need to be anywhere else.